Hey everyone, this is John from Models by John Michael. Y'all could go ahead and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That would be fantastic. Just be sure to hit that notification bell. That way you don't miss anything. And also go ahead and check out Facebook and Instagram and see what I got posted over there. So I want to do a tutorial for you guys for these AK weathering pencils. Now I've had these pencils for, heck, it's got to be 6 years, 5 years, something like that. And I've learned a lot about how to use these pencils in that time. I use them on a fairly regular basis when I'm weathering stuff. They've come in useful in many different ways. One of the ways that they've come in useful is changing the color of a paint. So there was a Japanese Zero that I did a while back, and the pilot's pants were called for a certain color, and I didn't have that color in my stash. However, I had a color that was close to it. It was like a khaki. But then I took the weathering pencils and I actually went over the paint with it, and it changed the color enough to where it was a close enough match to what the color of pants that they wore, that the Japanese pilots wore. So it's useful in that way. They're useful for weathering. They're useful for accenting things. So they're useful in a variety of ways, which I really, really do like. They are water soluble, at least most of the colors. The metallics for these are not water soluble. I believe you need some kind of solvent or something like that to use these for the metallics. I don't use the metallics that often, so it's not really that big of a deal for me. And to be honest with you, if I'm going to do some kind of chipping or something like that, I will probably go with chipping fluid or something like that rather than trying to use these for chipping. Now, if I'm doing like a worn surface, like if it's a corner and there's a little bit of paint that's worn off, then that's when I would just take the pencil and directly apply it, just to give that worn effect. So just some stuff to be aware of, but these are great. You can do rust effects, you can do exhaust, you can do smoke, you can do rain. It's all kinds of different weathering techniques you can do with these things, because you have, how many colors? 37 different colors in here, so you have quite a wide range of colors to use. Now, I'll be honest with you, most of the colors that I use are like the blacks or smoke or rubber. There's a few different browns in here that I use. Those are the colors that I use the most often. Most of the other ones I have not even touched. I mean, there are a lot of pencils in here I haven't even used. So just something to be aware of. Now, you can buy this kit like this, and I think the kit will run you about, I think it's 80 or 100 bucks. I can't remember exactly how much. Or you can buy the individual pencils themselves, or you can buy them in smaller kits of, like, I think it's 4 or 5 pencils. You don't have to buy the big kit like this if you're interested or you're thinking about getting these. But anyway, let's get on to the tutorial. I'll show you how I'm using these pencils right now, and then we'll wrap up the video. So stand by. All right, we are back. So what I am currently doing is working on this F14 Tomcat, as you can see, and I'm just basically giving her a dirty, grimy type look right now. So I've already done this side of the aircraft. I've simulated a fuel leak and some other dirt spots and things like that where the crew would be working on it or walking on it, stuff like that. So now I'm on to would be the aircraft left side of it, and I've already done this portion here. Kind of, you can see the dirt and stuff that's on there. What I'm using is this color here. It's smoke. If it'll focus. Okay, focuses well enough. So it's the smoke color AK weathering pencil, number 10003, and this is one of the water soluble colors. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the pencil. Let me put this right here. So you see my water bowl there? I'm just dipping the pencil in water. And what that does is allow the tip to soften a bit. You don't have to leave it in there very long. And then I'll just move this water back out of the way. And then I'll just take a paintbrush. Let me get the paintbrush a little wet here because its bristles are a little stiff. Then I'll just take the tip of the pencil, try and get it to focus. A little. I apologize if it's a little out of focus, but you'll get the idea. So, and then I just go ahead and get some of the color on the brush. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm just dry brushing this stuff on. So, and then to the model here, I'm going to go ahead and just do this section right here. And I'm just, now it's going to look hideous right now because it's just coming straight off the brush. The great thing is with this stuff being water soluble, it will, once it's dried, you can go ahead and remove material with this, with a Q-tip or a cotton bud, whatever you call them, to give yourself that nice weathered and grimy, dirty effect. You know, I've seen several pictures of F-14s to where they look dirty, they look grimy, they look nasty. So kind of what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm simulating that, you know, motif for this F-14. Like she's come to, you know, the end of her deployment or nearly to the end of her deployment, and she's got a lot of dirt and grime on her. Because from what I understand with these Navy aircraft, when they were in the middle of their deployments, they really didn't spend a lot of time washing them or cleaning them up. So they would get dirty, they get nasty, and there would be, you know, a lot of dirt and grime, fuel leaks, things like that on them. You know, a funny thing is, so I was in the Air Force, you know, I'm retired Air Force, and while I was in, we deployed for an exercise. So we were actually in Bahrain, I believe it was, and the Navy brought some of their F-18s. And I remember walking around the F-18 because I was just kind of checking it out. And one of the Navy guys was over there working on the plane or whatnot, or I don't know, maybe one of their crew chiefs or whatever. And I looked at the underside of the wing, and there, I mean, there were fuel leaks and everything else underneath there. Now, Air Force jets were always fairly clean. By the way, I'm just waiting for this stuff to dry if you're wondering what I'm doing. But I was waiting for, you know, the underside of Air Force jets are fairly clean and pristine compared to Navy jets. And I asked the guy, I was like, why, you know, don't you guys do anything about the fuel leaks? And he goes, well, no. How else would you know that there's fuel on the airplane? So, which I thought was an interesting answer. But it kind of just goes to show the difference in attitude, I suppose you could say, when it comes to the outlook of maintenance and things like that on your aircraft. So very, very interesting. Anyway, all right, so this stuff does not take very long to dry. It's actually pretty dry now. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a cotton bud like this, and I'm going to get a little bit wet. You don't saturate the tip. You just barely dip it in there, and then you squeeze out any excess water so it's just damp. I've seen guys where they'll take the cotton bud and they'll lick it, you know, or put their tongue on it. And you can do that, I suppose, if you want. As far as I know, these pencils are non-toxic, but then again, I don't know that I necessarily want to test that. All right, so then basically all you're going to do, you're going to start working with this stuff, and you're going to start removing. And you can do it like this too. So you can dab it, and then you take the dry end, and then you start removing. And then what that will do is it'll leave enough so that it looks kind of dirty, grimy. You know, like this F-14 has seen some action. She's been worked on, she's been walked on, she's been flown through a lot of sorties, things like that. And you will start to see some nice weathering effects. Now, one thing I also did to help accent the weathering for this particular aircraft was before I, when I put the primer down, then I painted it all black. Then I went through with, it was 3 or 4 different colors to on each of the panels, and then I went over it with the gray. And then after I painted it with the gray, and then I, of course, I applied my decals. People always ask, do you apply decals before you weather or after? My answer to that is always this. When the aircraft is in service, does it have the markings on it or not? Of course, the answer is always yes, right? The aircraft always has its markings on it. So you want to weather it as if it's an actual aircraft, not a toy, not just your model. So that's why I always say, before you start to weather, apply your decals, and then weather. Otherwise, you're going to have pristine decals on a weathered model, and that's not really the effect you're going for. So, so here you go. As you can see, now, hopefully you can tell the difference. Before, when I applied it, this was fairly clean looking, and now it's kind of got that dirty, grimy type appearance to it. And then I'll just go ahead and, actually there we go. Go ahead and apply this, and then I'll just start working it in. And you will start to get a dirty, grimy look. One thing with weathering that I've also found, that less is often more. So you can overdo your weathering. And I know there are some people out there that say, well, you can't really overdo weathering. No, you can. Now, you can weather your model as much as you want. It's your model. Like, you do what you want with your model. But if you're going for some type of realism, if you're going for, accuracy or anything like that, you don't want to overdo it. And then I'm just going to change up my Q-tip because it gets a little saturated with this stuff, and I don't want to keep rubbing it back on there. So I'm hoping that here, let me pick it up and show you. If you can see here, so here is the stuff I've weathered. That's the unweathered portion. I'm hoping you can see the difference in the color. So it's all about the subtlety of it, right? Because you're not trying to go, I'm not trying to go for an over dramatic effect here. I just want it to be subtle. I just want it to look, I'm going for more on the realistic side of the weathering of this aircraft, because I don't want it to look cartoonish. I guess that's the phrase that really comes to mind for me. But I just want it to look accurate. I want it to look like it could be an actual aircraft, so that when you're looking at it, or if you're familiar with F-14s at all, maybe you worked on an F-14 or something like that, you're looking at this thing and you're going, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with how it's weathered. This way, you don't think I'm crazy or think I'm going, overboard on the weathering. And of course, you're going to have areas on an aircraft, especially like in the F-14, where crew walked on it, or maintenance hatches, things like that. Up here on the nose, bring that into the picture. Up here on the nose, on the side where the crew crawled in, right? So that you had you had these places here and here where the crew would crawl in, and I've seen where there's a bunch of dirt and grime and brown marks all along here, right where the crew would crawl into the cockpit. And so that's something else I'm going to simulate, is just give that appearance of the dirt and the grime and stuff like that would be on the side of the nose of the aircraft. It's the small details. Actual photos help out as well with your referencing, because you don't want to do something that's not accurate. I mean, this is of another model, right? And I don't know who did this model, but props to whoever did it. I mean, that's the printing. I printed out the picture, but it's not the best quality. As you can see, some of the, I'm hoping you can see, but some of the weathering and stuff that was on the aircraft, I kind of tried to duplicate that a little bit. So it doesn't look entirely unrealistic. You see some variations in the coloring. You see some of the staining from the hydraulic fluid or the fuel or whatever the case may be on the aircraft, things like that. So just something to be aware of. So anyway, guys, I'm going to turn around this camera and we'll wrap up this video. Okay, so hopefully you guys have an idea of how to effectively use these pencils. The other great thing about these pencils too is you can layer your colors. So with the fuel leak, I put a little bit of brown, actually, like this earth brown color. Hopefully you can read that. The color is 10028 for the AK weathering pencils. And I layered that with some of the smoke color that I showed you, that I was using. And then I also used some of this gray or dark gray color, 10024, to kind of give a three-dimensional look to how, weathering might occur with a fuel stain. Because I didn't want it to look brand spanking new, like it just happened. Maybe something that happened maybe a little while ago, maybe a week ago, or something like that. And the crew had to obviously take care of the leak and stuff like that. So because part of it, to me, when you weather something, you want it to tell a story. You want the weathering to make sense, right? Because if you're putting a fuel leak on an aircraft where there was no fuel, right? There's no fuel tank, no fuel lines, nothing like that, then it wouldn't make sense to have a fuel leak there, right? Same with hydraulics or anything else, or just general dirt and grime. If you're putting dirt and grime on a surface of the aircraft where the crew never really walked, and if you find actual photos of the aircraft and you look at it and you're like, well, they didn't have anything going on in that section of the aircraft. That's all something to be aware of if you're going for realism. Now, if you're just weathering it to weather it, and that's because, that's just what you want to do, knock yourself out. No one's going to really say anything. But if say you're doing an aircraft for a model show, okay, you want to maintain some aspect of realism for your aircraft. Not that I'm doing mine necessarily for a show. If I feel confident enough at the end of my build that it might go into one of the shows, the next show in my region coming up, I think might be the end of summer. So, if I feel confident enough in that build, then I will enter it. But that's a long way off. It's not until like September. So, just something to think about, something to be aware of. But if your model, I'm not saying build it for a show, build it for yourself, build it because you love it, build it because you want to do it, not for someone else's approval. You know what I mean? I don't build models for anyone else's approval. I build them because I like to build them. I mean, I'm building the F-14 because, I grew up with Top Gun, which made the F-14 kind of an epic or iconic aircraft. But Top Gun made the F-14 one of the most iconic aircraft ever. So, and it is still, I think, one of the most iconic aircraft that have ever been used by the U.S. military and other militaries around the world. So that's part of the reason why I'm doing the F-14. I've never built one before, but I didn't want to do a clean, pristine aircraft. I wanted to do something that kind of that told its own story and was, at least somewhat unique. I'm doing the Jolly Rogers motif on it, so eventually it'll have the skull and crossbones on the tails, which I know a lot of people do that version of the F-14. I'm okay with that, but since it's my first one that I've ever built, I figured I might as well go with something that, you know, is renowned, right? And people recognize around the world. So if I do another F-14, I may do another unit, other than the Jolly Rogers. But, I just couldn't help myself. I'm kind of a big kid when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm an aviation geek. If it flies, I love it. So, there you go. But anyway, guys, really all I got for this video. Thanks for tuning in. I really do appreciate every single one of you guys. Means the world to me when you guys watch the videos, when you subscribe, when you comment, when you follow me on Instagram and Facebook, stuff like that. I really cannot thank you guys enough. I do have an announcement for you guys, but I will make that announcement in another video because I'm working on some things to try and make sure that's going to happen. But so I don't want to jump the gun and make the announcement and then nothing becomes of it. But just stay tuned because I do have something to me, at least to me, it's big news, and hopefully to you it is too. So anyway, guys, you guys take care. Happy modeling.